tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing with your career. Of course, you've been a cartoonist for quite a while. How long were you at the Morning Star, for example?
Oh, thanks, Josh, very
That's
much.
all right.
It's nice to be here in sunny Swindon in your lovely studio. And thanks for having me. Well, for those of your audience who don't know me or my story, I was a cartoonist for the communist newspaper, The Morning Star, which is a UK newspaper. It's quite small circulation, about 20,000, but it does come out every day. So it is very unusual in that sense. There is no other daily communist newspaper. And I was with them from 2015 to early last year, when this cartoon of mine that's on the screen was published, and the proverbial hit the fan over this cartoon.
So explain what the cartoon is actually about for people who might not be able to understand.
Okay, so early last year there was a big government consultation had just finished about the Gender Recognition Act 2004. Women's groups all over the country were contributing to this consultation, and so were trans rights groups. And this cartoon is about the fear that a lot of women had about predatory men using the GRA Act, if the rules around it were relaxed, to go into women's space and be predators.
And this is definitely something that we've seen in places like prisons in America, where people who have been convicted of sex crimes have then identified as women and been put in women's prisons, and then subsequently had other criminal convictions, to put it nicely, I suppose.
Yes, since my cartoon was published and the furor around it, obviously we've seen this happen in real life. This cartoon showed some little newts in a little swimming pool, an actual women's only swimming session, which does take place at some sports centres, or at least used to.
I used to work as a lifeguard, and I used to lifeguard a few of them.
Yeah, especially for pregnant women. You know, obviously, back in the day, before all this trans stuff came along, it was accepted that pregnant women might need more privacy and might want to go swimming with other women, you know. Anyway, so that's what the cartoon is about. It seemed quite harmless to the sub-editor who published it in the Morning Star, but when his boss got back 2 days later, by that time, they had a massive pile-on of hate mobs from Twitter and from within the left, from within unions. The Trades Union Council, which is over all the unions in Britain, had to have a special meeting just about this cartoon to threaten the Morning Star with defunding, the first time in their 70-year history. I think we might have a little article that was written about it at the time. This happened. It caused ructions at the Morning Star. The staff was split down the middle over it. The editor offered to resign over one cartoon.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, really, that all that fuss can be created over just something that, you know, it's relatively harmless to people, isn't it? It's not going to. You're not going to be harmed by seeing a cartoon that you disagree with. People
have analysed it since then, and I've tried to analyse because in the 5 years I was with them, I'd obviously contributed hundreds of cartoons on many different subjects, very controversial subjects: Brexit, the EU, the monarchy, the police. And since then, I'm still doing controversial cartoons, about COVID restrictions, and on and on and on. This one cartoon in my whole career as an artist, to have caused this amount of fuss, I still find it difficult to understand. Looking at it now, there are many outlets, websites, and so on, which still will not republish this because they're afraid of repercussions.
It's ridiculous, really, because it's just a common sense point, really. Like, to a normal person, you say, okay, you know, they're not going to look at that and they're going to think, oh, okay, fine. There's not really any controversy there.
I think the trigger things about it are things like the fact that it's little cartoon animals. The words "your pretty little heads," I think perhaps was triggering to some people. And the fact that it's a predator. There are lots of, on the trans rights side, but very few men will take advantage of this. But it doesn't matter that it's very few. When it comes to safeguarding, the whole point is that even if it's 1 in a million, you still have those safeguarding laws in place just to guard against that 1 in a million. So that argument doesn't matter. You know?
Would it be all right if you just move your microphone a little bit closer? There we go. So I thought it might be worthwhile looking at some of your other controversial cartoons, and the first one of which is one about the royal family. So would you be able to walk us through this one?
Yeah, so this is when Harry and Meghan, decided to abdicate themselves and go off to Canada and America. This was my last cartoon that I had published in the Morning Star before the one that got me cancelled. And this would be considered very controversial to anybody who was a royalist. You know, this cartoon is called Ticked Off, which has a double meaning. The Queen's ticking them off for absconding, but they're also a load of ticks and parasites hanging on the big bloated bottom of the UK taxpayers there.
I think that might upset a few people in our own audience.
Well, maybe it will. You know, there's even in America, there's lots of pro-monarchists, lots of people who like the British royal family.
I quite often find that Americans really like following our royal family.
They do. So this was published in the Morning Star. The Morning Star had no problem with publishing my controversial cartoons up until the one about which people call the crocodile cartoon. Its actual name is Endgame. It was called Endgame for a reason. Do you want to go back to it? Or
Sure.
It's called Endgame for a good reason, because I thought this whole issue of relaxing the rules around gender recognition would be the endgame for feminism. And I'm sure some of your audience have heard all the arguments now and understand a lot more about it. If we erase women's words and women's language, and then you erase the whole concept of what it means to be a woman.
Well, they are trying to erase what being a woman is. I've seen like UN resolutions where it's something like a woman is something that is timeless and formless. And they were describing women like they're a Lovecraftian monster, not an adult human female.
And words like chest feeding and bleeders and
gross and weird, isn't it?
Well, the trouble with all that is that you then take away the language of safeguarding. Because if you can't name the class of people, in this case women and girls, that you're trying to talk about, then you also can't talk about safeguarding laws. And this is why we're fighting back so strongly about it in the British Parliament.
Absolutely. And the next one is another one of your cartoons called The Presidential Makeover.
Oh, yeah. So President number 46 taking over from President number 45. And I immediately thought of a sort of little makeover box with the different colours in it. And he's obviously painting a MAGA hat with the trans colours. And this is how I saw him. Because Biden said on day one that he was going to bring in rules supporting trans rights over and above women's rights.
Yeah, I know that one of his health secretaries was actually a trans person, which was a very deliberate thing, I think, by Biden, because, of course, he's sending a very clear message that your health policy is going to be dictated by a transgender ideologue rather than someone who actually believes in biology.
This cartoon this was published by the website I'm currently the cartoonist for, which is uncancelled.co.uk. And they have so far had no problem with publishing my controversial cartoons.
Well, I can always attest to going to an independent website, because the mainstream media, they don't treat people particularly nicely, to put it lightly. I'm
in an unusual position, not just being a female political cartoonist, but also that I'm on this side of the this particular dispute. There are 3 or 4 other political cartoonists, women operating in Britain. One works for The Guardian quite often, but none of them have been cancelled because none of them have stepped their toe into this this cesspit of I don't quite know how to put it. This ideology. You know,
I think
this delusion,
yes,
which has took over institutions right across the Anglosphere.
It's like a new form of blasphemy laws, questioning the transgender kind of ideology, because anything else is normally fair game, but as soon as you touch on this, it's like
yes, I mean, so from my point of view, Josh, you've got me on here. I'm a terrible TERF, I'm a terrible transphobe. But from my point of view, how can I be phobic about something that doesn't actually exist.
Well, yeah. I mean,
So
I think there's a lot of consensus among the psychological community that it's gender dysphoria and transgenderism is a political component. It's not recognised by people who are practicing psychologists, like people that I have worked with and carried out research with. I've never heard any of them say anything about transgenderism. It's always gender dysphoria. And of course, gender dysphoria co-occurs with other dysphoric conditions of other types, which kind of suggests that it's something in keeping with that.
yeah, and the WHO only took it off their list of mental disorders in 2019.
Yeah,
so this
so
is a
it's
very
clearly
recently,
political as well.
Yeah.
It's not based on any new science that's come out. So
So here's
me
a
through
cartoon.
this next one.
Here's a cartoon. Here's a cartoon which some might call anti-Semitic.
So just to describe for our
Yeah.
listeners, it's a couple of hands with spoons in what looks like I guess a bowl of cereal, which has white privilege written on it.
Yeah. So there were two news stories in the news that particular week. Again, this is uncancelled.co.uk. One was about a debate on the BBC about should Jews count as an ethnic minority, and one was about Pontins, which is a holiday camp, had drawn up a list of undesirable Irish surnames.
I remember
So
that
it's like
being in the news, wasn't
Being
it? It was,
back in the 50s or 60s when it was no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. So both these stories were in the same week. So I did this cartoon of a Jewish man and an old Jewish man and an old Irishman sharing out this bowl of porridge with white privilege.
as if
because-
it's something to be dished out almost.
Yeah, both groups are accused of having white privilege, both Irish and Jews, and yet they are quite clearly both oppressed groups. So
Well,
that was
I don't know about the Irish, but
well, historically.
well, I suppose
historically.
I'm willing to kind of concede it a little bit, but I don't
But
really
I
like
think-
the idea
but-
of admitting the Irish were somehow
sure.
victims.
Sure. The point of showing these cartoons one after the other is to show that I've done plenty of controversial cartoons, both in my 5 years at the Morning Star and now, and none of them are getting anything like the pile-ons of hate or abuse or calling us transphobes or anything else that one cartoon with the crocodile.
I'm quite surprised actually that you are working at the Morning Star, because a lot of the cartoons I've seen from you don't necessarily seem in keeping with the overall political ideology of the newspaper.
Well, the great thing about the Morning Star, and I absolutely loved being part of them actually, is that they were very bolshy, they were very out there. They were quite prepared to poke fun at every kind of institution. And it didn't always align with the Labour Party. I mean, they were constantly having a go at the Labour Party, you know.
That's one of our favourite pastimes as well. It's funny.
So this one again is about this was about the recent Euro football
So
in Europe.
For people listening, this has got someone kneeling down, and then there's someone kind of on all fours looking at the ground, and it says, "I thought you said you wouldn't take the knee," and it says, "I'm not. I'm looking for me contact lens."
Yeah, so that was just taking the Michael out of this taking the knee nonsense in the Euro football.
Yeah, and rightly so, because they're claiming that it's not a political thing, but as you mentioned, it's got the connotations with Black Lives Matter.
And what was really awful about it was that a lot of teams were not doing it.
Yeah,
And
so it made us look even worse.
It made us look stupid, and FIFA had actually got the teams to have on the side on the side of their uniform here a little sewn-on patch, which actually said, I think it said respect.
Yeah.
So they all had that on their costumes anyway, on their shirts anyway. And some of the teams, I think Denmark was one of them, just stood there and pointed to the respect badge instead of kneeling.
That's quite funny, really.
Yeah, so it was really, the English team were marking themselves out, and we just looked ridiculous, really.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I did enjoy watching the actual matches, and the fact we got to the final was pretty great. But
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the team spouting diversity, even if they did win, you'd never hear the end of it. Just like this team won because of the hardships that the media put them through for taking the knee or something along those lines.
And other podcasts, rival podcasts yourself, like Spiked, for example, have talked quite a lot about how football is being politicised because it's a working class game.
And it is a little bit of a war on the working class, because I know that a lot of people in the Labour Party are kind of middle class, metropolitan types, and I know that's a little bit of a stereotype, but I think even many in Labour have acknowledged that that's a problem, and it doesn't look very good for them, even from a political standpoint, for them to be doing stuff like that.
Right, so what other shocking cartoons have we got, Jack?
I think there's just one more. I think that it was the route out of lockdown.
This was a COVID restrictions cartoon. Again, uncancelled.co.uk got no problem with publishing this. This shows a little car full of English people, as it were, coming out of this dark forest, you know, the winter of lockdown that we had. It's a shame that some of that yellow is showing up as green on the screen there, but never mind. And this is called A Game for All the Family. So this is like Snakes and Ladders. And we were promised a route out of lockdown, and obviously my cartoon is showing that there are so many things they can use to get us straight back down to the beginning again, which they will. I mean, we're not even out of restrictions yet, really.
Not completely, no. And they're trying to coerce people into getting the vaccine by saying you can't go to large venues and stuff like that, and it's infringing on people's right to make choices for themselves. And
again, to a lot of people, that is a controversial cartoon. They don't like any criticism of the restrictions or the wearing masks or anything like that.
I would imagine that there'd be some fringe weirdos who'd be like, this cartoon is literally killing people, or something along those lines. And you do hear about it all the time, and out of all of these things, out of all of these views that you clearly hold, the thing that is very curious about it is that it was the transgender thing. It's the thing that we cannot question, the gospel that cannot be challenged.
Yes, because there are quite a lot of issues nowadays that you're not supposed to talk about, aren't there? You know?
Oh yeah, definitely.
But I think that was the last of those cartoons, wasn't it? Yeah. So this is just to show that I'm still doing them. I'm still getting my cartoons out there. And since my cancellation, is this the article?
Yeah, it's just a couple of articles that have actually covered your case, if you wanted to have a look at it in more detail. It has actually been quite widely covered,
mostly abusing me in the paper. You only have to Google my name, Google the Morning Star, and if you just Googled Morning Star controversial cartoon, you will see all the abuse that was,
leveled towards you.
I felt very sorry for the newspaper. Actually, they couldn't move; their hands were tied. You know, all their funding comes from the unions. Now this is
you don't actually blame them for pressuring you to leave them?
Absolutely not.
No.
And in fact, the guy who was my line manager there, the art editor, actually asked me at Christmas, could he have a copy of my book signed for his little granddaughter, which of course I was only too happy, you know. So I've still got friendly relations with some of the journalists I knew there.
So it was more about the pressure from externally.
They're still not allowed to print anything by me, and they're still not allowed to print my right of reply. While we're having a quick look at this, the original cartoon, I did send an explanation to the Morning Star at the time, which they didn't print. And the fact that they didn't print it was part of the problem. And I explained to them that the whole issue of transgenderism was very close to me, because as a teenager, a girl, I had felt that way myself, like lots of women do. You know, and I hate to say this to everybody out there, but we grow through it.
Oh, that's what people need to hear.
We grow through it. And you might feel uncomfortable in a woman's body your entire life, but you find ways to deal with it and ways to cope with it. And it's just another symptom of puberty. Some girls go down awful routes of starving themselves, cutting themselves. And some do it in a more benign way. They just join some sort of cult like goths or something like that. In my day, it was all dressing up in black and punks, all these different youth movements.
It has become a bit of a subculture, and almost in a bizarre way, a trendy thing for
I'm not trivialising people's mental distress, but nowadays it's literally, oh, you've got blue hair, you must be queer. Like, you can't just have blue hair.
Yeah,
and
everything's got a political connotation now, hasn't it?
That's kind of the way it's gone. And so it was a issue very close to my heart, and they would not print my explanation for it, and they still won't, which means I haven't been able to answer the readership of the Morning Star except on other platforms, which is a shame, you know. So this was an article that was written at the time.
I think we're slowly running out of time.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to mention before wrapping up and moving on to the Scotland case?
Well, the difficulty I had getting my cartoons out there, before the pandemic, I used to have a one-woman show in my home city, Bristol, and I couldn't do that. So late last year, I published this book, which is my own cartoon review of the year of the pandemic. It's the only cartoon book of 2020 published by a radical feminist, and you can get it on all the major booksellers online, Amazon and everybody, but maybe not after this show. Who knows? So it's 2020, the year we were all cancelled. Just Google it.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, you can go to prelotuseaters.com and get access to all our premium content.
Things like our book club, where we examine classics like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and examine the themes that underpin it, and how we're getting worryingly close to that, or modern books like Mark Sidwell's The Long March, which is how exactly we ended up in the current cultural situation we're in and what conservatives can do about it. Or you can check out the other series we have, such as our Contemplation series, where Hugo and Josh decided to, in the latest one, have a look at an examination on the ways that other elections have been rigged for no reason at all. Or you can check out our Epoch series, which is one of my personal favorites, because this is where I get to talk about history. And I love talking about just random things from history. And one of the great things we can do with this series is talk about those things that aren't so often discussed. So, I mean, you can talk about Xerxes' army, the vast army that invaded Greece during the Greco-Persian Wars. Or we can go through things like Herodotus' view on the Scythians. Who are they? You probably don't know, but they used to be quite an important people a long time ago, and they're very, very interesting. We've got some really good reports about them. Or we've got premium podcasts, which is things we generally don't want to put outside of the paywall because we might get in trouble for them, such as the list of things that Alex Jones was right about. Or we do just very interesting discussions because there are things that we do lots of work on. Another one is that I'm particularly proud of is where Christopher Hitchens, the famous new atheist, would have fallen during the modern culture wars, because he probably wouldn't have been very woke. But we also have lots of interviews and articles and other things on the website that you can sign up to enjoy, and we're really proud of them.
So if any of that sounds good to you, go over to lotuseaters.com and sign up for as little as £5 a month to support us keep the show going, and also to get access to all the content. Thank you and goodbye.